Hello, welcome to Out of the Ashes. Today we will be reading Chapter 3, Part 3 of Out of the Ashes, The Fallen Ones. Alexander never knew that his life was going to be changed so terribly. One day he had a loving family, a safe, warm home to go to. He had everything he could ever wanted at 7 years old. Older brothers to look up to, a father he revered and honored, a mother he loved and gave the best snuggles. He was now 13 and he feels like it's been a lifetime of pain and heartache, better described as a life of loneliness. He continued to spend his days training his body to fly further, go harder, and need less. In 6 years, he never realized that day would be the day that he would leave his homeland to find his parents. The day got started like any other day. He got up, got something to eat, then he headed up the mountains where he could be sure that he wouldn't be spotted by humans. He always went deep into the valley where the cliffs and the rocks were high up and hard to get to by foot. This way, he would be free to fly for a very long time. He could continue to push himself each day and not have to worry about being seen. He could also go down into the trees and race in and out of the treetops to increase his cornering capabilities. Normally, he would do each of his exercises 4 times before he would stop training and eat lunch. But today he finished early. So he decided to head back closer to the cave. When he got down the mountain, he decided to walk and rest his wings. Lost in his thoughts as he walked along the forest floor, Alexander wondered how his family was doing. He never figured out what or where his 2 brothers went. Aside from training each day, he would just observe the humans and how they lived. He never had any contact with them, no matter how much he wanted to. He could never trust how he felt about them and how they would really treat him because he was completely different. He always sided with that he should just be cautious. Be careful. Especially since humans were always looking for new dragons to capture for a trader or a hunter. It was just better that he remain in the dark for now. Every day when the night came across the cliffs, Alexander would jump off the edge and fly as far as he could. At first, he would tire out easily and would have to fly back and land before he could make it anywhere too far away that he couldn't make it back. But today he was able to fly, and his lungs didn't feel stressed like they had before. He flapped his wings and kept rising higher and higher, getting further away from home. In his rising to get higher and get further away, he noticed the ground below. In his years of looking for his parents, he found out that he had to fly north to a land called Baltica. He also found out that there was a 3rd dragon captured that same day as his parents, and that was a 3rd ship that in the fleet was following. He knew it was going to be cold, and that there was no way for him to prepare for the temperature changes that awaited him. He found out that the breeder had a big castle on the furthest tip of the land before the land started to freeze into ice caps. He ate well before taking off so that he wouldn't have to worry about landing anywhere and become unsafe. He was finally doing it. He was finally able to make the flight. He had waited so many years to make this trip. His only regret was that he wished that he was making it with one of his brothers. But he couldn't rest in those thoughts. They only saddened him. He had to remain positive. He had to encourage himself during this flight. He had to think about what he needed to be focused on, and that alone. His trip and making most of the miles that he could while it was dark, because when the sun rises, it occurred to him that his trip would have to come to an end so that he could remain to be unseen. So into the darkness he flew, keeping the northern star of Baltica right in front of him. He took a big, deep breath and pushed onwards. Hey, you all. I wanted to take this time between chapters, and I wanted to bring to his attention the holiday that we have coming up this weekend to celebrate. Sunday will be Father's Day 2024. And although I don't know how your father was or who he was in your life, I want to say a happy Father's Day to all of the fathers that are listening. We want to thank you for all that you do in your family's lives. Those encouragers, those teachers, those mentors, those providers, those men who are mentoring other children that are not their own, those that are caring and loving and encouraging children that may not have any genetic connection to them. I want to say thank you to all the fathers who are being the examples of God and the examples of love on this earth. You do not know the example that you are setting by walking out God's truth for your life. And I want to celebrate you for the rest of the week to say thank you. And we know everything that you do for your family. We love, we thank you, and we praise you for the hard work and the dedication that you've given to the lives that are in your care. Happy Father's Day, gentlemen. You deserve it. Way to make your day better. Ziggy didn't look like the other dragons. He wasn't as big or as magnificent as his brothers and sisters in the League of Protectors. Not that he wasn't as powerful, because he is. His powers came from a different place than the other dragons did. His powers came from his experiences. His story isn't like theirs. When he was born, he wasn't as strong, as cute, or as magical. He was born, and there was no breath in him. He had no color, and his scales were weak and brittle. His mother and father didn't see his worth then. His father laid him in the woods next to the mountain. His mother leaned down and kissed him sweetly, and then they flew away. All that his parents could see was that he wasn't normal, and that he might not make it through life, that his life would be struggled. All they knew were there were standards of what was perfect and what made a perfect dragon, and since Ziggy didn't meet with those perfect ideologies, he was discarded like the last night's trash, thrown to the mercy of the night on the mountainside. His parents thought he was better off feeding another creature than being their precious son. But God saw differently. He knew why he had created Ziggy. Although all the dragon protectors lived in heaven to protect the people but they were not born there. Their lives all began and hatched on earth and lived beside the people. They had to experience life for themselves. When God found them to be noble and righteous dragons, they were then chosen to be a part of the League of Protectors. There were only 12 stations that had the dragons placed to be their protectors. There was no station for a dragon to protect the babies and the children. The 12 dragons each had a different purpose and function set forth since the beginning of time. So while on earth, if a dragon followed the path that they were laid before his feet, his or her feet, and they listened to the Holy Spirit, they would find their purpose for which God had created them. So when Ziggy's parents chose to leave Ziggy behind, God knew that Ziggy's life was worth far more than his parents could have ever envisioned. God knew he needed to be rescued and set on a correct path. God unfortunately also knew that it was the abandonment that would make Ziggy an amazing protector for God's children that came home to heaven. If Ziggy could learn to overcome the hurt and the pain of being discarded by his parents, and he could overcome the obstacles his life had set before him, it was going to be an uphill battle. But God found Ziggy alone, whimpering and crying under a hill full of blackberry bushes that he had rolled under after his parents had left him. God picked up Ziggy and calmed his cries. He nestled Ziggy in his arms and wrapped him in a blanket. Ziggy was still too young to create his inner fire, so a blanket was needed to keep him warm still. It was a good thing God was watching over him that day. God took Ziggy with him and began to nourish his weak and cold body with the first warm milk from the herd. Once he had got a little bit older and had teeth, then he could be released back into the mountainside to fend and feed for himself. The Holy Spirit would guide and lead him to find his path to the light. And the Holy Spirit would unction all the dragons to go towards the good and to stay away from evil ways, but not every dragon listened. Every dragon had the free will to listen and follow God's lead. It was their choice. After God released Ziggy back into the forest, he spent a lot of time alone. He didn't have siblings or parents or a family to teach him how to pass the time. There wasn't someone to guide him or to go get him anything to eat or where there was a safe place to rest. The only company Ziggy had was the hope for a better future with friends and games and laughter. He had nature and his thoughts for the longest time, so it was only reasonable that Ziggy would come up with his own games to keep him busy throughout the day. It was amazing how resourceful a pine cone could become when you're bored, or how adventurous a deep cavern could be on a cold wintry night. Once Ziggy learned how to make fire with his spit, keeping warm at night wasn't as hard as it used to be. Ziggy would see other animals in the forest, and he would see their mothers and their fathers caring for their young. And in Ziggy's mind, he would wander, and his thoughts would question how his parents were. He wondered awful lot. He knew he was a dragon, and he didn't know why he was the only one. He wished that he had a family to love and to care for him like the other animals did. At least that's what he thought about until he came across a rabbit's nest. He was going to make them his lunch until something told him just to watch them. He watched these babies from up in a tree for hours. He watched them scurry about, eating berries from the bushes and nuts from the forest floor. He thought that they were just like him. They had no family and no parents to teach them. But then he noticed a mama rabbit who would return twice a day and check in on them. Occasionally she would bring food or her milk to them, but for most of their day she was away from them. Every time she was near, Ziggy would smell her coming. She carried a heavy scent, and he had concluded that she was going away because she smelled. She was going away to protect them till they were old enough to be on their own. Ziggy concluded that some animals didn't care for their young the way that he had imagined. All animals were different, including Ziggy. So maybe a dragon was like a rabbit, and the mother and the father had to go away to protect them. However, that logic didn't last too long because he never saw any other dragons. No one ever came back to take care of him. When Ziggy realized he was different than any other kind of animal, he somehow felt secure in who he was. He may never know who his parents were, but he figured that he must be like the rabbits, only loved for a little while and then released into the world to discover and play. So that's exactly what Ziggy did every day. He would make a game or a mystery out of his surroundings, and since he was a dragon and could live wherever he wanted, then his surroundings were constantly changing and becoming his play area. He loved the days when he was close to a large lake or by the sea. He loved playing in the water and in the sand. He could build sandcastles as big as he was and crawl through them. Or he could make caves out of the sand and crawl in and out of them for the coolness of the deep sand that it would provide. His imagination was amazing at telling stories and keeping him entertained for hours. At least on most days. He could keep his mind busy. Most days. Today, for some reason, it was different. Today, he didn't just feel like reenacting a story or creating a family out of twigs and rocks. He woke up and the clouds felt like they were closer and darker than any other day. He began to wonder what the point of his life was. Was this all he was ever going to do? Get up, eat, play, go to sleep every day? There had to be more. There had to be other dragons out there. He couldn't be the only one. He just couldn't. What was the point of being able to talk if you had no one to talk to? What was the point of loving to play and create if there was no one to share it with? And that concludes today's reading of Out of the Ashes, The Fallen Ones, Chapter 3, Part 3, and then also Chapter 4, Part 1. We hope that you enjoyed today's reading, and we hope to encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, like, and comment on this video. And remember, if you'd like to purchase your copy of the book for yourself to have in your home, please go to Amazon.com and type in @Tiffany author, and all of our books will be listed there. Also, if you go to your local book retailer, you should be able to find it in places like Books A Million, Barnes & Noble, and Walmart.com.